Have you ever felt like you were too far gone? Like Allah could never forgive you? Like your heart was too hard, your sins too heavy, your life too messy to ever come back? This is the story of one brother who started at zero, no faith, no direction, no purpose, and how Allah took him from the darkness of doubt to the light of Imaan. And maybe, just maybe, his story could be yours too. There's a moment in every person's life when they realize the world can't fill the emptiness inside. The parties, the money, the success, the likes on social media. It all feels good for a moment, but then the night comes, the noise fades, and you're left staring at the ceiling, wondering why nothing satisfies you anymore. That was this brother's life. On the outside, he looked fine, smiling in pictures, chasing dreams, living what everyone thought was the perfect life. But inside, his soul was starving. He didn't pray. He didn't remember Allah. He didn't even think about the purpose of his existence. Until one day, everything changed. This is the story of how Allah took him from zero to Imaan, and how He can do the same for you. The brother's journey didn't start with fireworks or some grand sign from the heavens or a sudden transformation in a single moment. No, it started quietly, almost invisibly, like the first drop of rain on dry earth. His life had been running on autopilot for years. He woke up, chased money, chased friendships, chased things that never truly mattered. On the outside, people thought he was living the dream. He had the latest phone, the nicest clothes, a social media page filled with smiles and perfect moments. But inside he was crumbling. At night, when the noise of the world faded and it was just him and his thoughts, there was a heaviness on his chest he couldn't explain. A loneliness that no crowd could fix. A restlessness that no amount of fun could erase. He tried to ignore it for a long time. He laughed louder, worked harder, distracted himself with everything this world could offer. But the truth is, you can't fill a heart that was created to remember Allah with the emptiness of the dunya. He didn't know it then, but Allah was already calling him back. Because sometimes before Allah gives you faith, He first shows you the emptiness of everything else. He lets you taste the bitterness of a life without Him so that when you finally turn back, you will never want to let go again. And that's exactly what happened. This brother thought he was living freely, doing whatever he wanted, but deep down, he was a prisoner to his own desires, chained to habits and addictions that brought him nothing but regret. There was no peace in his heart, no clarity in his mind, no purpose in his soul. And that's what life without Allah does. It leaves you empty, restless, always searching but never finding. Then came the moment that changed everything. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some near-death experience or a miracle falling from the sky. It was a simple conversation late at night with a friend. A conversation about death, about what comes after, about whether we're ready to meet the one who created us. For the first time in years, he felt his heart wake up. It was like someone had ripped the blindfold off his soul. He realized he had been living like he would never die, like his actions didn't matter, like this life was forever. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the grave, about standing before Allah with nothing to show but wasted time and empty pleasures. That was the night he knew something had to change. But change is never easy. Especially when you've spent years far from Allah, you feel guilty, you feel ashamed, you feel like you're too dirty, too sinful, too lost to come back. That's how he felt. Every time he thought about praying, he remembered the sins he had committed. Every time he thought about turning back to Allah, the whispers told him it was too late, that he wasn't the religious type. Maybe you felt that too, that heavy voice inside saying, "Who are you to pray after the life you've lived? Who are you to seek forgiveness after everything you've done?" But here's the truth. Allah never turns away from the one who comes back to Him, no matter how far they've gone. The Prophet told us that Allah's mercy is greater than His wrath, that He forgives sins even if they are as high as the sky. If only we turn back to Him sincerely. And that's what this brother learned. His journey back to Imaan didn't start with perfection. It started with brokenness, with guilt, with whispered du'as in the middle of the night, asking Allah for just one more chance. At first, it was hard. He didn't know where to begin. He wasn't suddenly praying 5 times a day. He wasn't suddenly reading Quran for hours. No. It started small, watching a reminder video, attending one Jama prayer, whispering, "Ya Allah, guide me," when he didn't know what else to say. And that's all Allah asks. Take one step toward Him, and He will come rushing toward you. The Quran tells us, "And when my servant asks you about me, indeed I am near. I respond to the call of the caller when he calls upon me." That verse became real in his life. He realized Allah had never left him. Even in his darkest nights, Allah was there waiting for him to call, waiting for him to come back. But the road was not smooth. Old habits pulled him back. Friends mocked him. The whispers in his head told him to give up, that he wasn't good enough, that Allah would never forgive him. Yet something inside kept pushing him forward. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was both. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he was heading somewhere real. Every prayer, even if imperfect, gave him a little bit of peace. Every verse of Quran felt like it was speaking directly to his soul. And slowly his heart started to heal. That's the beauty of Imaan. It doesn't come all at once. It grows like a seed. It starts small, invisible at first, buried deep in the soil of your heart. But with every prayer, every dua, every moment of remembrance, it begins to sprout. And one day you look back and realize the tree of faith has taken root in your soul, and you never want to go back to the emptiness you once knew. This was his journey, from zero to Imaan. A journey of falling and getting back up. A journey of learning that Allah doesn't need you to be perfect. He just needs you to keep coming back. And maybe, as you listen to this story, you'll see pieces of yourself in it. Maybe you're at the beginning of your own journey. Maybe you're standing where he once stood, broken, guilty, wondering if Allah could ever forgive you. If that's you, then know this. It is never too late. The doors of mercy are always open. The question is, will you take the first step? It was late at night. One of those nights that felt like every other night in his life. The same routine, the same cycle, the same empty laughter with friends, the same loud music blasting in his car, as if he could drown out the silence in his heart by filling his ears with noise. The streets were quiet, except for the hum of his engine and the rhythm of the songs that had become the soundtrack of his life. He was driving home, half listening to the lyrics, half scrolling through his thoughts when it happened. In the distance, flashing lights pierced through the darkness like a warning sign. As he got closer, his heart began to race even before he saw what had happened. There on the side of the road was a car, completely overturned, its metal twisted like paper, its windshield shattered, the faint glow of hazard lights flickering, as if signaling the final moments of someone's story. For the first time, he let the questions rise to the surface. Why am I here? What is the purpose of all this? What happens after death? Is there more to life than this endless cycle of chasing things that never seem to fill the emptiness inside? And in that moment of complete honesty with himself, with tears he had not felt in years rolling down his face, he whispered words he had not spoken in a long time. Ya Allah, guide me! It was not loud, it was not dramatic, but it was real. It came from a place so deep inside him that he did not even know it existed before. It was like his soul itself was speaking after years of being silenced by the noise of the world. And that is the thing about wake-up calls. They do not always come in the form of miracles or dreams or voices from the sky. Sometimes they come in the form of a car accident you were not part of but cannot stop thinking about. Sometimes they come in the form of a random moment that cracks open your heart, just enough for the light to come in. Sometimes they come in silence, in stillness, in that one moment when you realize life is short, death is certain, and you are not ready for what comes after. That accident was not just an accident for him. It was a message, a reminder, a turning point, because deep down he knew Allah was calling him back before it was too late. And for the first time in years, he was ready to listen. After the accident, after the sleepless nights, after the weight of mortality pressed down on his heart in a way he could not escape, something inside him shifted. It was not instant and dramatic like in movies. It was subtle at first, like a small flame in a room that had been dark for years. But that small flame grew brighter every day. He realized he could not go back to living the way he had before, pretending life was just about money, friends, and weekend plans. An accident had ripped open the veil he had been hiding behind his entire life, and now there was no going back. But here was the problem. He did not know where to start. He knew nothing about faith beyond a few cultural phrases he had grown up hearing. He had seen people pray, heard the call to prayer echoed through the streets his whole life, watched Muslims fast in Ramadan and break their fasts with dates and water. But to him, all of that had been background noise. Traditions other people followed while he carried on with his life. Now for the first time, he was curious. He was hungry for answers. He wanted to know why people prayed, why they talked about Allah with such love, why some of them had a kind of peace in their eyes that he had never felt in his whole life. So he started searching, quietly at first, almost shyly, as though he was afraid of being judged for even asking these questions. He began watching videos late at night when no one else was around. At first it was just a few short clips that popped up online, someone talking about the purpose of life, someone explaining what happens after death, someone describing how Islam views happiness, loss, and destiny. He listened not because he was ready to change, but because deep down he was desperate to understand. He found himself drawn to lectures about death, about the afterlife, about the mercy of Allah, about how no matter how far you have gone, the doors of repentance are always open. Every word felt like it was being spoken directly to him, like someone had reached inside his chest and found the exact questions his heart had been carrying for years. He remembered hearing one scholar say, "You can fill your life with everything except Allah, and you will still feel empty. But fill your life with Allah, and even if you have nothing else, you will feel at peace." That line hit him like a storm because it explained everything he had been feeling all along. That was why the parties, the money, the attention, the likes, the friends, all of it had felt so hollow, because none of it was made to fill the soul. Only Allah could do that. And so the late night videos turned into books, and the books turned into long conversations with people who actually prayed, who actually believed, who actually lived with the awareness that this life was temporary and the next life was forever. He found himself watching the prayer times online, listening to the Quran for the first time not as background noise, but as though it held the answers he had been looking for. Sometimes he did not even understand the Arabic words, but the recitation did something to his heart he could not explain. It was like water being poured on soil that had been dry and cracked for years. He began reading about people who had turned their lives around, people who had been lost and then found peace in faith, people who cried in sujood after years of living far from Allah. Every story felt like a piece of his own life reflected back at him. It was like Allah was sending him one sign after another, telling him that the door was open if he was willing to walk through it. The more he learned, the more he realized how little he had known about Islam, about life, about himself. He had always thought faith was a list of rules, a set of restrictions, a chain that would take away his freedom. But now he saw it differently. He realized that faith was not a cage. It was a key. A key to peace, to purpose, to the kind of happiness that does not vanish the moment the party ends or the moment the money runs out. Some nights he would just sit there, phone in his hand, scrolling through reminders about death, about forgiveness, about the mercy of Allah. And he would feel this strange mixture of hope and fear. Fear because he knew how much of his life he had wasted chasing things that did not matter. Hope because for the first time he believed maybe it was not too late. Maybe Allah could forgive him. Maybe there was still a way back. He remembered hearing a scholar say that if you take one step toward Allah, He runs towards you. That sentence alone made his chest feel lighter, like maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the mess he had made of his life. He was not religious yet, not fully. He was still learning, still struggling, still unsure of what to do next. But one thing was clear, the search had begun. And once you start searching for Allah sincerely, the world stops feeling the same. The music that used to numb you starts to feel empty. The distractions that used to entertain you start to feel meaningless. The sins that used to feel harmless start to feel heavy. And the heart, for the first time, begins to crave the peace it was created for. That was where he was now, caught between the life he used to live and the life he was beginning to want, standing at the edge of a journey he did not fully understand yet but knew he had to take. Because deep down he realized this was not just curiosity anymore. This was hunger. This was thirst. This was his soul finally waking up after years of being asleep. And there was no going back. But the moment you start searching for Allah, the battle inside you truly begins. It was no different for him. On one side, there was this new hunger for faith, this growing awareness that life was more than what he had been living for. This feeling that the peace he had been chasing in the wrong places was finally within reach if he could just take that next step. But on the other side was everything he had been for years. His old habits, his old friends, his old lifestyle, the comfort of the familiar even if it had been empty. The heart wanted change, but the nafs resisted. He would watch a video about the mercy of Allah, feel his chest tighten with longing, think to himself, I need to start praying. I need to leave this life behind. But then the phone would buzz, friends would call, plans would be made, and the cycle would pull him back. It was like standing in two worlds at once. The world of noise and distraction he had always known, and the world of peace and surrender he was only beginning to taste. The pull between them was exhausting. Some nights he would feel so inspired that he would think, this is it. I am done with this empty life. I am turning back to Allah for real this time. But the next morning, temptation would whisper in his ear, convincing him there was no rush, that he could change later, that maybe he was not strong enough anyway. And that is the hardest part of coming back to Allah. Not the knowledge, not the learning, but the battle with yourself. Because the shaitan does not give up easily, and the habits of sin do not break overnight. There were nights when he cried quietly in frustration because he could feel the truth so clearly in his heart, but could not yet break free from the chains he had built around himself for years. He remembered hearing once that when someone tries to return to Allah, the shaitan says, how can you change after all the sins you have done? You are too far gone. And he realized that was exactly what was happening to him. The guilt would creep in, telling him he was not worthy of a new life, that Allah would not want him after everything he had done. But then he would hear verses of the Quran reminding him that Allah forgives all sins, that His mercy is greater than any mistake, that even if you come to Him with sins as heavy as the sky, He will forgive you if you turn to Him sincerely. Those words became his lifeline. They were the only reason he kept trying, kept learning, kept pushing back against the voice that told him it was too late. The struggle was messy, full of ups and downs, moments of faith followed by moments of weakness, nights of hope followed by days of slipping back into old patterns. But somewhere deep inside, he knew this was part of the journey, because no one transforms overnight. No one becomes strong without first falling and standing up again and again. And maybe that was the point, to learn that coming back to Allah is not about being perfect, but about refusing to give up no matter how many times you fall. That was where he was now, wounded but walking, stumbling but moving forward, battling his own soul one day at a time, because something inside him refused to let go of the hope that Allah was waiting for him on the other side of the struggle. After weeks of battling himself, of learning, falling, hoping, and doubting, there finally came a night when he realized he could not keep waiting for the perfect moment to start. There would never be a perfect moment. He had been telling himself he would pray when he was ready, that he would change when his life calmed down, that he would turn back to Allah when he felt pure enough to deserve it. But deep down he knew those were excuses. If he kept waiting for the right time, he might never make it. Death does not schedule appointments. Guidance does not wait for convenience. So that night, sitting alone in his room with his heart beating fast and his mind full of everything he had learned over the past few weeks, he decided to just begin. No speeches, no grand promises, no audience, just him and his Creator. He looked up how to pray because it had been so long that he barely remembered the steps. He watched a simple video explaining the motions, the words, the meaning. And then, awkwardly at first, nervously, with tears threatening to fall, he stood up, whispered Allahu Akbar, and prayed for the first time in years. It was not perfect. His voice cracked. He stumbled over some of the words. He was not even sure if he was doing it all correctly. But none of that mattered, because for the first time in so long, he was speaking to the one who had been waiting for him all along. And the strange thing was, he had expected to feel shame, to feel like he was unworthy, to feel like Allah would turn him away after everything he had done. But what he felt instead was something he had not felt in years. Peace. A peace that wrapped around his heart like a blanket, like a whisper saying, "You were lost, but you are home now." And in that moment, he understood something he had only heard in lectures before, that Allah loves when His servants come back to Him, no matter how far they have gone, no matter how late they arrive, no matter how many sins they carry on their shoulders. That prayer became his turning point. It was shaky, imperfect, full of mistakes, but it was real. And sometimes that is all Allah asks for, that you come to Him sincerely, even if all you have to offer is a broken heart and a whisper for guidance, because He can turn the smallest step toward Him into the beginning of an entirely new life. That night, as he finished his prayer and sat there with tears streaming down his face, he realized this was not the end of his struggles, not the end of his journey, but it was the first time he felt like he was finally walking in the right direction. The days after that first prayer felt different in a way he could not fully explain. It was not like all his problems vanished overnight. His old habits were still there. His friends were still calling him for the same plans. The temptations of his old life had not disappeared. But something inside him had changed. For the first time in years, his heart felt quiet. It was a strange kind of quiet, not the empty silence he used to hate, the kind that made him run to music and parties and endless distractions to fill the void. No, this was different. This was a quiet that felt full, like standing under the sky after rain, like the world itself had slowed down just enough for him to finally breathe. Every time he prayed, even though he was still learning the words, even though his voice sometimes trembled and his movements were hesitant, he felt that same peace washing over him, like waves hitting a shore that had been dry for too long. He realized now why people prayed 5 times a day. It was not a chore. It was not a ritual done out of habit or pressure. It was a lifeline. A moment when the noise of the world fades and you stand before the one who controls everything, pouring out your fears, your mistakes, your hopes, and finding comfort in knowing He hears you, even when you cannot find the right words. For so long he had chased happiness in everything else, in people, in success, in entertainment, in fleeting pleasures, and every time it had slipped through his fingers like sand. But here, in sujud, with his forehead on the ground, he found something he had been missing his entire life. Peace that did not depend on circumstances, peace that did not vanish when the night ended, or the money ran out, or the people left. It was the kind of peace that stayed even when life was hard because it came from the one who never leaves. He started noticing small things he had never paid attention to before. The sound of the adhan echoing through the streets suddenly felt beautiful in a way it never had before. The Quran recitations he used to scroll past now made him pause, sometimes with tears he did not even understand. Even the simplest things like saying Alhamdulillah after a meal or Bismillah before starting something filled him with a sense of connection he had never felt before. And the strangest part was, the more he prayed, the more he remembered Allah throughout the day, the lighter his heart felt, as though the weight he had been carrying for years was finally being lifted one prayer at a time. It was then that he realized something powerful. Peace is not found in the absence of problems, but in the presence of Allah. And for the first time in his life, he was beginning to taste what that actually meant. But peace does not mean the journey becomes easy, and he learned this lesson almost immediately. For a brief moment, after that first prayer, after feeling that rush of calm he had never known before, he thought maybe things would suddenly fall into place. Maybe his faith would only grow stronger, his heart would only get lighter, and his old life would fade away like a bad dream. But life does not work like that, and neither does faith. Within days, the tests began. Old friends started calling again, voices from a life he was trying so hard to leave behind. "Where have you been? We haven't seen you in weeks." They laughed. "You're changing, bro. What's with the prayers? You think you're better than us now?" Their words were coated in humor, but he could feel the sting behind them. They didn't understand why he kept saying no to the plans he used to join without hesitation. At first, he tried to explain. He told them he was trying to live differently, trying to get closer to Allah, trying to stop the habits that had been ruining him slowly from the inside. Some listened in silence, some nodded and changed the topic, but others mocked him, saying this a religious phase wouldn't last. And deep inside, their words hit a nerve, because part of him was scared they might be right. Then came the temptations, the places he used to go, the music he used to blast, the endless hours wasted on things that left him empty. Suddenly, they all seemed to call out to him louder than ever before. It was like the moment he turned toward Allah, the doors of distraction swung wide open, tempting him to walk back through them. Sometimes late at night, when the world was quiet and his thoughts grew heavy, the whispers of shaitan grew louder. You think one prayer will change you. You think you can just leave it all behind. You're too weak. You're too far gone. This won't last. Those whispers crawled into his mind, twisting his guilt, making him wonder if Allah would really want someone like him after all he had done. But slowly, through the tears, through the doubts, he began to realize something. These tests were not signs that he was failing. They were signs that he was growing, because no one is tested for staying the same. Tests come when you try to rise, when you try to climb out of the pit you've been in for years. They come to see if your faith is real or just words spoken in a moment of emotion. And with every temptation he resisted, even if it left him exhausted, he felt a little stronger. With every gathering he walked away from, every distraction he chose not to indulge in, every prayer he forced himself to make even when his heart felt heavy, he began to understand that faith is not proven in comfort, but in struggle. And then came the harder tests, those not from people, not from temptation, but from life itself. Days when things went wrong, days when problems piled up, days when he prayed for something and it didn't happen the way he hoped. At first, he didn't know how to handle it. The old version of him would have drowned his frustration in distractions, run to people, or given up on prayer altogether. But now, even in his confusion, he kept praying. He kept talking to Allah even when he didn't have the right words, even when his heart felt tired. Because somewhere deep down, he was learning that faith isn't about everything going right. Faith is about holding on to Allah even when everything feels wrong. And through it all, the temptations, the mockery, the doubts, the disappointments, he realized something powerful. Every single test was shaping him. The late night whispers that told him he was too weak taught him to seek refuge in Allah with more sincerity. The mockery from friends taught him that guidance is a gift, and not everyone will understand your journey. The temptations taught him that letting go of old habits is a war you fight one day at a time. And the unanswered prayers taught him that Allah's plan is bigger than what we see in the moment. Slowly, painfully, he began to see that faith isn't built in the moments of ease. It is built in the nights you cry but still raise your hands, in the days you feel like giving up but keep saying Allahu Akbar anyway. Because every test was a chance to prove, not to Allah because he already knows, but to himself, that no matter how messy his journey was, he would not give up on the one who had never given up on him. And then, almost without realizing it, something inside him began to shift. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no single moment where he woke up and felt like a completely different person. It was slow, like dawn breaking after the darkest night, subtle at first, but undeniable as time passed. One day, he caught himself turning down a plan he knew would pull him back into his old habits, and he didn't even feel torn about it anymore. Another day, while praying, he realized he was no longer rushing through the words. He was actually feeling them, pausing in sujood as though his heart wanted to stay there a little longer. He noticed that when problems came, instead of panicking or running to people first, his instinct was now to raise his hands and whisper, "Ya Allah, help me!" He started reading the Quran slowly, clumsily at first, but then with a hunger that surprised even him, like his soul had been starved for this connection his entire life. The friends who mocked him began to fade from his circle, replaced by brothers who reminded him of prayer, who spoke about Allah, who pushed him to become better without judgment. His nights changed too. Where there used to be endless scrolling, noise, and distractions, there were now quiet conversations with Allah under the dim glow of his room. Moments where he poured out his fears and hopes like a child speaking to the only one who truly understands. And with every passing day, the emptiness that had once consumed him felt like a distant memory. It wasn't that life became perfect. There were still tests, still moments of weakness, still mistakes. But now there was direction, there was purpose, there was hope. He understood, maybe for the first time in his life, what it meant when people said Allah can turn your darkness into light. Because here he was, the same person who once felt lost, sinful, unworthy, now living a life where Allah was at the center. And he realized this was only the beginning. The journey wasn't about becoming flawless. It was about walking toward Allah one step at a time, falling and getting back up, praying even when it was hard, holding on even when the tests came. Because as long as you keep moving toward Him, He promises to come to you faster than you can imagine. And that promise was enough to carry him into this new life with a heart full of faith, hope, and a peace he once thought he would never find. And maybe that is the lesson hidden inside his journey, one that speaks to every heart listening right now. No matter how far you have gone, no matter how many mistakes you carry, no matter how heavy your past feels on your shoulders, Allah never closes the door on you. Not once. He waits patiently, silently, lovingly. All He asks is that you take the first step, no matter how small, no matter how imperfect. Because the moment you do, the moment you turn to Him with a heart that whispers, "I need you," He runs to you with a mercy greater than all your sins combined. This brother's story began in darkness, filled with regret, confusion, and emptiness, but it ended with light, with prayer, with peace, with a life built on faith instead of fear. And maybe yours can too. Maybe tonight, alone in your room, with a heart that feels heavy and tired, you can take that first step back to Allah. Maybe your life can change in ways you can't even imagine. Because when Allah opens a door you never knew existed, it leads to a place your heart has been longing for all along, a place called peace, a place called home, a place where you finally realize you were never too far for His mercy to reach you.